Welcome to the Backyard Professor Chess videos. I had a family emergency I had to attend to for the last couple of weeks, so I am back. I'm sorry for the delay. We're going to continue working through Bobby Fischer's fabulous chess games, strengthening our own in the process. We're still in 1957. Fischer is a young Fischer, but he's in the 2200 rating now. He has really grown strong. Here he plays the Sicilian defense against Hearst. Fischer is playing the black pieces. So we've got a typical Sicilian, knight f3, d6, and now d4. C will take d4, of course. Typical Sicilian motions. Typical Sicilian opening. Knight takes d4. And Fischer will pull his knight f6. So here come the knights. Bobby's going to try to limit the influence of the knights, which is typical. And now he's bumping for more space here. Fischer is going to go ahead and directly challenge the center because that's where the fight usually goes. And his knight comes back to f3. Hearst isn't going to lose anything by that. Queen c7. Bishop is going to bring up to d3, and then Fischer's going to bring his knights into this, and we've got a castle. The key is castle early. We all know that by now. And now Fischer's going to bring on the b5. He's going to get his queenside thrust going a little further. And he's going to fianchetto his bishop, get the long diagonal across the center. The king is going to immediately go to h1, tuck him away, get him out of the way. Don't be a worry for later on in the game, and the bishops continue coming out. So White's got a real solid center. Now he's doing this partly by occupying and mostly through influence from a distance, of course. Fischer's going to try to bring a knight into the game, get something going here. His bishop is going to bump down, and now he's going to fianchetto his other bishop. So Fischer is zigzagging across the center from a distance with his bishops. Really good opening at this point. His opponent, Hearst, is going to push the f5. Very interesting. And Fischer's going to bring his knight back to the f6. And now Hearst brings his knight to g5, and Fischer's going to tickle the knight. He's going to want him to say, okay, what now? And he comes back to the h3. So they're trying to manipulate their pieces at this point. Nothing's coming through the center. There's no real direct attack. So yes, there are several piece motions with one piece. It all works out. Fischer is not going to exchange that pawn. After all, he says, wait a minute, let's try something here. And Hearst will continue manipulating his knight. And now Fischer starts utilizing his knight. So there's a lot of dancing and prancing around at this point. Yes. Here comes the queen bump of the pawns on the queen side, tickling the knight, and Fischer goes ahead and exchanges the bishop. He says, okay, I will do that. Let's get rid of the bishop for now. And he comes to queen d7. In the process, queen e2. I hope I wrote this right. Yes, I had to have. Queen e2. And now Fischer's going to nab the file. See, you see a file. Take it as you can. That really is the inroad into your opponent's position. There's no question. You can see that clearly with that black rook on the C file. So let's see if that plays a point in this game. The queen side thrust is going to continue, and Bobby realizes, okay, I've got the file. Now I have to tuck my king because this is going to start getting hairy. So let's go ahead and castle, get it over with. A will take the B. A will take the B, giving the white a file to the white. And now he also begins to utilize his file. And Fischer says, it's all good. Whoop, his queen must have got drunk the other night. She's tipsy-tovey. Stand up, ma'am. Fischer's going to push to the center. At this point, he has not technically utilized the file with his rook. It's not really necessary at this point. White is trying to get something going with his file. E will take the d5. And now the knight will take the d5. And now the knight will take the d5. And that probably wasn't the best option because black's central power, black's central attack is going to become very strong here. And so they're saying, well, he shouldn't have. Technically, that's a decent knight posted, though, at this point. So he's countering it somewhat. But now look, here comes Fischer again. So Fischer is going to influence these central files. It's true his opponent has the A file, but the central files are the two more important ones at this point in time. We'll see how he does. Bishop comes to E1. And now queen takes D3. And there was, he should have kept more pieces on the board at this point. It probably would have been better for him. It's all good because they're going through. Now he's using that file really powerfully. He's got a good presence there at this point. We'll see if he can use it very much. The knight will come to C5, an excellent outpost for that knight. And you can see the other thing is it shortens Fischer's influence on that file, on the C file. So bumping his knight, of course, but also blockading this other knight. So that's not a bad move. And now the rook just simply drops to D1. Again, the use of the file. That's kind of cool to see how he does this. Now, the knight will take the bishop. The bishop had a real long, nice diagonal, pinning that pawn to the king. So he's going to go ahead and take that. And then the rook C comes to C1 and total domination. The rooks have used their files. Now they're on the 8th rank. This can be very dangerous. When your opponent does something like this, you really need to pay attention. You need to realize, okay, this is full attack mode. No question about that. So the best thing, of course, make sure, now you tuck the king, but make sure your king is in contact with the pieces also, because that's an extra support. You know there's going to be some exchange here, right? So this is good. And there is. Rook takes the bishop, of course, because what this does, and you can see that, is he's going to exchange the rook. And now the rook goes check. And, of course, the king is going to come to F2, so you have to do something with your rook. And he brings it up here to E4. So now he's on the other side of that pawn, right? The pawn had blockaded that particular file, but he's still got a partial file, and he's on the white, his opponent's side. So all is well so far. The rook of black is better placed than the rook of white at this point. The bishop of black is blockaded in by his own pawn versus this knight, which is way out here, way out in the field. The long range should favor Fischer here. The bishop is the long range piece. It can sweep all the way across the board compared to that knight if the central pawns get moved off the board. Or if Fischer can remanipulate where to put his bishop to give him that edge on the long distance. So we're going to see how that works. And of course, now he's got a pass pawn. That makes sense that the rook takes that pawn because now he's got the pass pawn. And Fischer knows it's going to be a few moves before his bishop has a longer range. So it's better at this point to reposition the bishop to give him that extra length of influence. Now his opponent is not going to let his knight sit out there forever. So he is going to bring him back into the game. That makes sense. But look at this. Rook takes b4. And that got Fischer an exclamation point. That was an amazing move. Rook goes to a5. He's not going to take the rook. Do you see why? It's a fantastic tactic. It was a great way to get rid of the pawn. Had he taken it, there would have been check with the fork, right? So you always got to watch the potential for tactics. That fork would have done it. It would have finished the game. He would have had to have resigned. So very, very strong move by Fischer. So rather than lose the rook, he simply moves it. And now the bishop can take c5 and go check anyway. And the rook is going to take the bishop. So here we are. And the rook will come to f4. Fantastic outpost. Check to the king. Bobby's pawns are better than his opponents. So it's down to the end game real fast. Let's see what happens. King e3. Rook will take the pawn, of course. Now what Fischer has to do is play a good end game because his opponent's not going to quit. Hearst was a very good player. So here we go. He's going to bump his pawn. That makes sense. Bobby's simply going to put his rook right back there on f4. He's going to bump his pawn to give his other pawn support. Blocks the pawns at this point. Here comes the pawn. This is the value of the pawn that he's gonna try to put some pressure on. However, Fischer has this move, check. And of course, that means he does lose that pawn. But the way Fischer has manipulated it is as he loses a pawn, so does his opponent. So he keeps the upper hand on his opponent in this end game. King is going to come to e5. Rook is going to come here to e3. Check. He's going to come back. He's going to go forward. I apologize, to f6. And now he just goes f3. Check. And he's going to come back here to e5. And now Fischer, again, and this is a wonderful illustration of this principle. Yet again, the king is a fighting piece. So now that Fischer has put his rook in the superior position, he is on offense. He's not on defense with that rook. The white rook is playing defense. Fischer is on the offense. The king is a fighting piece, so bring him into the game too, especially to escort the pawns down in to get a queen. The king here does the job magnificently while the rook guards both the king and the pawn. It gives the king an island to hide behind, if necessary, when the white rook starts to check the king. So this is a really cool illustration how he does this. King's going to go to d5. King is going to come forward again to g6. Now the rook is going to try to come up behind so that he can get a better angle, right? Comes right up to f4. Keep your eye on the pawn, because if you can clear the opponent's pawns, you can bump your own in the end game. Now the rook is going to come here trying to protect his pawn, and here comes the other pawn. Fischer plays this so well. Now, G, of course, will take check, and the king will take the pawn. So this should be a win for Fischer. The rook will come to h1. The king will go to g6. Because he's activated his king, he knows he's going to have to move everything forward anyway. He's put his king in a position to guard those pawns. The king is going to try to come into the game this way, and Fischer has an extra pawn. The pawn is protecting the rook. So now, which way is he going to go? The rook goes to d1, and here comes the h4 pawn. Bump the pawn in. The rook is going to come to g1, and now the king, again, step by step, as he advances his pawns, then he brings his king as well. The king can't be in front of the pawn because the rook, but he can be behind the pawn protecting it while his other rook helps out. So this is going to be very interesting how this plays out. It's a beautiful endgame. Rook goes to h1. Rook's going to come all the way back to f8. It's the same effect, it's the same power from a distance as it is up close. The last thing Fischer wants to do is somehow fall into a fork where he loses his rook. He can keep the king out of the game from a distance. That king can't ever come into this battle. So essentially, it's a king and two pawns versus one rook. And you can see right now the handwriting on the wall. Black's going to march one of those pawns in. So for all intents and purposes, this game is over. It's a beautiful way that Fischer shows how to keep that king out of that game. So rook can go to d1 again, and he pushes the pawn. h3, that's the closest one, yes. Now the king's going to come down to e4, and the king is going to once more bump to h4, escorting the pawn in. Actually backing him up. He's not escorting him from the front. He's backing him up from the end. And now rook comes to d7, and rook's going to come to f1. Now they switch places, and it is inevitable at this point. Rook comes back to d2, and now here comes g4, just in case the king is pushed away from the pawn. The other pawn protects the pawn. This is a masterful way that Fischer has done this. Rook to d8, h2, absolutely, and it is here that white resigns. Inevitably so. So that was a wonderful illustration, I thought. One of the open files, well, one was the fighting for the center, but once those files started to open and they began utilizing them, that made all the difference to get the position in. And then once they got to the end game, you activate your king and you use that king to help push your pawns all the way down and in. And this was masterfully done by Fischer. He has now gotten seriously strong as a contender. So thanks for watching the Backyard Professor videos. I shall have more out for you shortly. In the meantime, remember, be good, do well, have fun, make lots of friends, stay happy. The world needs more happy and more friends, and we are the ones to do that. So I will see you in the next Backyard Professor chess videos, and with some more interesting games by Bobby Fischer, without question.